Welcome to the Walls Could Talk in Buffalo. Don, how you doing?
All right, Josh, yourself?
I'm doing great. We're in our series here of position groups, the most interesting players from 1985, 1988 range all the way through today. Just going to remind people that you started your internship at the Bills in 1988. You became director of football administration 2005. And was there all the way through the 2016 season with the end of the Rex Ryan regime and right before Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane came in.
I was there with Sean McDermott for 5 months, but not a season.
Correct. Yes, once they started getting good. So today we're going to feature the best defensive backs, not even just the best, but the most interesting names and maybe stories that, and recollections that you have and that I have from my time.
Yeah.
A, as a fan, B, as a coaching assistant with the team. And a couple things stood out to me. One, there are some current guys who we have to just mention. Tre White, obviously the title of the show, from Nate Odoms to Tre White. Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, and my favorite current player, Taron Johnson.
Oh yeah,
he is my favorite current player on the team. I love everything about him. He's a dog. Like he's slot corner, which I think personally is the hardest position to play on the field.
Yeah,
he's a willing tackler. He made one of the biggest postseason interceptions in Bills history. He's my favorite player currently.
Speaking of which, a few things. Matt Darby reached out to me on LinkedIn, who we interviewed a few months ago, and he had his big interception in '93 against the Cowboys. It was amazing how much he remembered about it. Like he remembers looking at Aikman.
We're going to talk about
him. Okay, but he asked me if we ever decided what the best interception ever.
The online verdict was Sam Adams.
But he was a close second. Right?
I feel it.
I think so.
If it was up to me alone, he would have won.
I'll tell him that. So yeah, the DBs are interesting because with a company I joined after the Bills, some of what we did, it's AI based, but some of it dealt with mindset, and we did get into sports. And what we found from the teams is that to the extent that they wanted our data like position specific, they viewed DBs very differently. Like an offensive lineman needs to be able to work cohesively with the group,
the unit.
But a DB, they're out there on an island. Right. They have to have some swagger. They have to have a short memory,
right?
And so they are a different breed.
Sure, that's interesting. It's a very different personality trait, and they're almost like a hockey goalie. Like if you make a mistake, you're going to give up points.
Yeah,
like your direct mistake can lead to points, whereas a D lineman, a linebacker, it's not so much boom and bust on every play,
right,
as it is either a corner or a safety.
Oh, and their athleticism is ridiculous. I mean,
ridiculous.
They're
the best. They're likely the best athletes on the field, right?
Probably. They're covering receivers who are lightning fast, but the receiver knows where they're going to go. The DB has to react to them.
Correct.
Like, whew,
wow. Right. Yeah. So the current guys, obviously, everybody else talks about them. A lot of love for the DB room. Sean McDermott has done an amazing job with the defensive backs. So we're gonna kind of go backwards here. I have two guys on honorable mention for more personal reasons from the show rather than the 30 guys that we're going to list after that. The first one's Chris Hale.
Let's go. Okay.
Who we had on the show very early on, who we're hoping to maybe get on my show with Marlin for the Notre Dame USC game. USC grad, works in media now. Real fun interview, good guy.
It was.
Had a couple special teams plays. Wasn't, the biggest contributor on the team, but one of those guys who, was a depth guy on the Super Bowl teams.
Yep.
And also told us a great story about how he felt like the bickering Bills was a real thing.
It was. We wanted honesty, and we got it from him. Not that the other guys weren't honest, but I think the Pete Metzlars and John Davises that we talked to at about the same time, at Steve Taskers, they really felt like the bickering Bills were overblown. Chris Hale did not.
No.
He came right out and said, no, it was the most dysfunctional team. He goes, it was the best team, the most talented team I've ever been on. But he said, the fighting was real there for a while. He was friends with Magic Johnson, and when he brought Magic Johnson to a game, and
he's an LA guy. You could just tell that he's an LA guy.
Yeah, he when we went to LA to play the Rams, I think it was 2016, I saw him on the sideline, and I was at the sideline. We had a conversation, and he was working for the league to do uniform inspections, and he told us a story
about Stephon Diggs,
about Diggs, and telling him, something about his mother.
Well, right, you pull your socks
that?
up so that you can pay your mom's mortgage.
Yeah, that's right.
Because otherwise it's like a $25,000 fine.
Yeah, and he came back and he did it.
Yep.
Yeah, so.
The other guy, someone that I know personally, and will probably elicit some eye rolls from Bills Mafia here, Daryl Porter. Was on the team when I was there. Famously, is probably the guy most responsible for the Music City Miracle and not being in his lane, not holding contain. I'm not sure whether he alone would have made that play, but I think if Bills Mafia thinks about Daryl Porter, that's probably what they think about. And me personally, I became kind of friends with Daryl. Daryl's son now is a starting safety at the University of Miami.
All right.
He's a Hurricane. And I became friends with him. I went down to Miami one time, and I was going to meet up with him. But then he got caught up doing something. So he told me that he was deep in Miami, whatever that means. So that's been kind of a running joke from some of my friends and I since that we weren't able to meet up with Daryl because he was doing something deep in Miami. I don't.
Okay.
So those are my two honorable mention guys that didn't necessarily make the biggest impact on the field, but were notable names.
Yeah.
So now we're going to go from the what I deem kind of the top 30 from the mid 80s on. We did it by interceptions, which is not a great way to do it for a DB.
If you're going to try to measure it, that's
there's really no other way.
Right.
So the names are not indicative of their talent level or maybe even their importance in Bills history. Right. Don has not seen the list. So we're just going to go from bottom to top here, and it's kind of an interesting mix, and some of the best players are definitely not last here.
Okay.
So the first one is another name that's going to elicit some eye rolls, especially from me. Chris Watson.
The punt catcher.
The punt catcher. Yes, and I think that would be the vast majority of people's reaction. That was one of the more frustrating things that I've been a part of. Special teams was not Coach Wade's. It was not a focus of his.
We loved Wade. Wade was 29-19 when he came back to the team. Speaking in press conferences was not a strength. You had to do it. But I remember I was in the building and I was finally in a position that I had an office that I had a TV on. I hardly ever had the TV on. But on Wednesdays, I did. I watched the press conference, which was taking place downstairs. And I had that on in my office. The reporter asked Wade about Chris Watson.
They had just traded for him from Denver.
Right. And, what kind of impact he would make. And he said, in the return game, and he said, well, he is not as much a returner as he is a punt catcher. And I'm like, I went down to Jim Overdoor's office and I said, did you hear what Wade said about Chris Watson? That was a curious thing to say.
Punt catcher. And then he had a brutal fumble in the third game of the year. We were 2-0 at the Jets. We were up 7-0, and he fumbled. And they returned a kickoff for a touchdown. Then he had a fumbled punt. Ouch. And after that, he became kind of a running joke, right? Like punt catcher was one of those things that you remember it 23 years later.
Yeah, that's the starting point is catching it. And then you're supposed to
get some. He had no explosiveness whatsoever. He was supposed to be sure-handed because we had so much trouble in the preseason finding somebody who would literally just catch the punts. So Wade was literal there, and I think that's truly what he was brought in to do. But it's one of those things that you just don't want your coach saying. It was a bad look, and unfortunately, it previewed so many bad things on that special teams unit all year that you were scrambling a week or two into the season to find some dude just to catch the punts.
Yeah, it's one of those internal conversations you have. Hey guys, let's start by at least just being able to catch the thing, and then wherever that happens to be, we'll start our drive. You don't just say in public.
So frustrating. The next guy on our list is a guy who I know you've been in contact with, Nikel Roby-Coleman.
Yeah,
he only had 2 picks as a Bill.
Is that it?
That's it.
Well, one of them was big because I liked Nikel Roby-Coleman. We're going to get him on the show at some point. A few things about him. Real small, 5'7", and undrafted free agents. We like those guys. We talked to a couple of them, and it's fun when they make the team. Jabari Greer we spoke to. That's a good interview. If
we're going to mention him,
okay, I would encourage people to go back and listen to that one. But he was, of course, USC. You're going to be talking to him for your show. But when we played the Rams, I remember going down to the field again. Same day I saw Chris Hale but he had a lot of family at that game. And we won that game thanks to a pick six that he had.
Okay.
It was nice. But then in London, we go down 20-0 or something, come all the way back, take the lead, and fourth quarter, Jacksonville's driving, fourth down, a pass play out in the flat, and he breaks it up, and there was no contact. It was a terrible call. I hate to blame the refs, but
you do that every once in
a while. But it really, and it turned the game around. It gave them the fresh set of downs. They scored. They won. He really didn't even touch them.
Here's the ironic part: he committed one of the most egregious personal pass interference penalties in NFL history.
That's an overcorrection
in the NFC Championship game. The Rams and the Saints, which propelled the Rams to the Super Bowl. So, ironically, he got the benefit of the doubt on a call, which was obviously in a much bigger game in a different uniform.
Yeah.
But it's funny how that play has stuck with you.
Yeah.
With him, getting called. And then the non-call it's clearly the most famous play of his career.
Oh, he admitted it rightly so after in an interview. He's like, I think he said something.
And I think that's the play.
Surprised they didn't call it.
That's the play that Shawn Pittman, after the game, said to the refs, like, you guys are changing people's lives. With your malpractice here, or whatever he said about how terrible that call was. And it's life-changing for these guys.
It is. And the league couldn't say a thing. There was nothing, no defense of that.
It was an awful
non-call.
It was an awful miss. Next guy on our list, real famous name, one of the biggest free agent pickups, I believe, or trade, Lawyer Milloy.
Oh yeah. Lawyer Milloy was was killing us at New England. He was a captain on those Super Bowl teams that were just owning us. And then he had a contract dispute with the Patriots. He was holding out, and they were playing a game of chicken. And then finally, Belichick traded him here.
How ironic that both his starting safety and his quarterback, he both traded in division to the Bills. Do you get a sense that that's almost like a sign of disrespect?
Well, he clearly wasn't afraid, and in the long run, it turns out that it didn't hurt him. The first game, he had to be really think, because I would think we won 31-0.
Yeah.
I think he had to be like, "What have I done?" Because Milloy had a game kind of like what do you have, a sack, an interception, a fumble return.
Yep.
Yeah, like Bernard had the other night, who looks like a DB, doesn't he?
Sure, he sure does. Yeah. So people have said that introduction of Lawyer Milloy in the stadium the first week was about as loud as they've heard the stadium in a long time. There was a lot of excitement for that 2003 season. And then that
was three. It was 3. Bledsoe had been there a year, right?
Yeah, because the Patriots were back-to-back. No, they won the first one. So there was a lot of excitement for that season. And then obviously coming out with 31-0, that's the Sam Adams interception game. Yep. I mean, that was the snowball rolling down the hill that day. And then I always like to point out that the season ended by losing 31-0 in New England.
Symmetry, right?
Symmetry, right. Next guy on our list is a personal friend of both of ours, the co-host of What Happened on Saturdays with Marlin Kerner.
All right.
So I had to, of course, give a shout out and include Marlin on our list. A solid NFL career, derailed by injuries. We talked to him on our show about that. He had a great career at Ohio State. He was a co-captain on some really talented teams that frankly just didn't have a quarterback, or else they would have beat Michigan. Please check out our show, What Happened on Saturdays, on the Cover One Network. Next guy on our list, we had just a few weeks ago on our show, Jabari Greer.
Yeah, I'll go back. I'll say something about Marlin too. Yeah, he's a personal friend of ours. Great business person. Real measured, intelligent, and he's been on our program here, and I'm thrilled that you guys are doing that show together. So,
Jabari Greer.
Well, again,
he said a lot. He spoke for himself. He was one of my favorite interviews we've had.
Oh yeah, again, but I know we were trying some things, new times. We put it up late, but everyone that I've heard that watched it is like, this guy was fantastic. Just a ball of energy.
Was he like that?
Yeah.
Okay, so he was just infectious. I was ready to suit up and play just listening to him. But that's how he was in the building.
And it's a good question, because there have been players that you knew when you were there, and I knew, and when they came on our program, we thought they were somehow different, either more energetic or less energetic. He was exactly the way he always was, just excitable. Yeah, when he was talking about what it's like, really every play in front of a big crowd, and the way the sound goes off, and then your friend Steve got some red meat, great stories about his Super Bowl year at the Saints.
Yeah, and he was a big time contributor.
He was
to the Saints winning the Super Bowl. So that's another guy on this list who has won a Super Bowl. There's a bunch of these guys that have won Super Bowls other places. He's one of those guys. Next guy on our list, real big name. You've talked about him on our show a couple times. I know you've had some go arounds and some run-ins with him in your role as director of football administration with contracts. Troy Vincent.
Oh yeah, Troy. We picked him up from either the Dolphins or the Eagles. He'd played for both. I forget which team he came directly from to us, but he was at the time president of the Players Union. There's always one current player who serves in that role, and he happened to be it, which meant he knew the CBA very well.
Was there any hesitation? Was there ever hesitation to sign or bring in the guy who's the president of the Players Union?
You have to know what you're getting. I don't know if it's hesitation, but you better know it, because he's going to be eyes and ears. He's going to be talking to people. He's the only player we ever had that was excused from being late from practice, because Mr. Wilson was so enamored with him that he would go to lunch with him. And
what?
Yeah. He would go to lunch with Troy Vincent, and Troy was like, sir,
like in the building or like outside?
In the building or the Danny's.
Really?
Yeah.
And you'd walk into Danny's and Ralph Wilson and Troy Vincent are just sitting at a table. How interesting.
Yeah, or if they were even just in the cafeteria. And Troy would be like, sir, practice starts at 1:00, and he'd be, you'll get there. So
wow.
What he never got in trouble.
What was he picking his brain about?
Just as someone as president of the Players Union that he thought had some kind of collective knowledge, that he really thought he was a mouthpiece for the players.
Interesting.
Yeah, and since my office was next to Mr. Wilson, for some reason, I would hear some of these conversations. I would hear Joni Graham was across the hall, and Mr. Wilson would say, "Joni, could you try to get Troy up here for me? I just want to talk to him."
When he was in the office, he was loud, right? He was loud. Like, was
no
he hard
filter.
of hearing at that point?
Yeah.
Because he was just loud.
Yeah.
I just remember you know he was coming down the hall.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's his building, it's his team, but he was like he was louder than the average office employee.
Sure. Yeah. Every person in the office, you kind of there were some.
There were a couple, sure.
You just there was a ceiling of volume that you have, and there was none.
Well, you're the owner. You can
Right.
you can do what you want. Next guy on the list, to me, was a terrible draft pick, a terrible use of resources. I think it was, sometimes picks are second guessed. This one was definitely first guessed. I think it was, kind of the pick that defines Marv Levy as a GM, Dante Whitner.
There was came down to the consensus was there were two safeties that were, first round guys. And it was either Whitner or was the other one? Shoot. And the Mel Kipers of the world, and they were,
They took him 8th, right?
Yeah.
Was there any hesitation in taking a safety that high?
It was a glaring need. It was, Malloy was gone. The safeties were just guys that had very little experience. It's one of those few years where everyone just knew, like the cab driver that Chris Berman would talk to, everyone just knew the team was so deficient at safety that not corner, but that it was spoken about openly, that I think even the team didn't even try to hide the fact that they were safety.
So there was no one pushing back on, hey, a safety. Was there any thought to trading down?
Well,
because that's really high.
I think someone could look this up, but I think the other safety I want to say was a University of Texas guy, and I think got picked before that.
Okay.
Somebody can correct me on that.
Okay.
So Whitner was the guy, and his first game he had what should have been a pick 6 in New England, and it was block in the back they called on Nate Clements.
We're blaming are we blaming the refs again here?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Actually, that's
Wow,
you looked at that on YouTube and you were like, "Ooh, that was."
You woke
a tough
up on
one.
the wrong side of the bed this morning, buddy.
that's like it would have won that game in New England and
so it's funny because a couple years ago the consensus was the Bills had to take a DB. They lost Levi Wallace in free agency. So and Kyer Elam was the pick.
Right.
And everybody on earth, Brandon Beane said that everybody said, hey, we need a corner. We need a corner. We need a corner. And sometimes if you draft for need, it doesn't work out. And Kyer Elam so far has not worked out. And Dante Whitner was another one. High profile. I mean, high pick.
He was. He went to Cleveland and he played well.
Was he? Yeah, he was like Dante Hittner. Wasn't that his nickname?
Yeah, he was a hitter. He was tough inner city kind of guy. Like he just had he kind of wore that on his sleeve that he wasn't afraid to mix it up. He was a heavy hitter, but
just didn't work out.
No,
that happens.
Yep.
Next guy on our list, one of my favorite players when I was there, and I think one of the more underrated Bills maybe ever. His son is in the NFL now.
Okay. He
was an Ohio State. He won the Jim Thorpe Award as a Ohio State DB, as the best DB in the country. Antoine Winfield.
Oh yeah.
One of the best tacklers I've ever seen.
Unbelievable tackler,
and not afraid to stick his nose in any way, any time against anybody.
No,
and he was not big.
He was not big. He just threw his body around. But there had to be something about his technique that was just special.
Yeah, and he was a really nice guy.
Yeah,
like, that might sound a little like boring or cliche, but he was just super guy.
Yeah.
One of those guys in the locker room who everybody liked, everybody respected. He wasn't a talker, he wasn't loud, but he just commanded respect. A, by the way he played, and then B, just by the way he carried himself. And it's not a surprise at all to me that his son has had a successful career in the NFL too, because you could just, all he had to do was look at his dad, learn everything that his dad did. Emulate that, and you're going to be fine.
Yeah. Now Winfield, I don't remember what his interception numbers were. I don't think they were
not high. That's why he's early in our show.
Yeah,
but he wasn't. But he made plays. He made significant plays in other ways.
Yeah,
other than just interceptions.
Again, the DB, their one-on-one coverage, and locked in with the receiver. Yet they're somehow responsible for knowing that it wasn't a pass play.
Right.
It was a run play that's happening behind them.
Yeah.
And they have to break and then make the tackle against
and his run support. His run support was fantastic.
Oh, he's
one of the best tackling corners that I've ever seen.
Yeah, he was a tackling machine. It was fun to watch. It was just crazy how good he was at that.
Next guy on our list, he had a mention in our show with Jeff Burris last week on what happens on Saturday with Marlon Kerner. Okay. A little bit of a rib on his at his expense about his conditioning. Another first-round pick, Thomas Smith.
Yeah, out of North Carolina. I've talked with him. I think
we need to get Thomas on the show because it was implied that when Marlon was a rookie, that he was looking for kind of a mentor and somebody who he would look up to, their practice habits, their nutritional habits, their eating, their workout habits. And he gravitated towards Jeff Burris rather than Thomas Smith. And both of them came to that conclusion at the same time. So Thomas Smith was one of those guys who had all the athletic talent in the world, right? First round pick. And it just kind of didn't happen, right?
I mean, I don't know. It depends how that's a slippery one because he started on a Super Bowl team right away. I think that first year, was it 93?
Yeah.
He came in, he was immediately the starter. He was the starter for a few years after that. And, the team obviously wants first round pick to be a starter immediately and for several years. But if you're not playing well enough, you don't, get the job, sustain the job just because of reputation. You have to keep earning it. And he did that. But I would say, I think we had this conversation last week about someone else too, and I was trying to recall like a real memorable play.
Oh, like the Doctor of Sack, Leon Seal?
That's what it was.
Right. If they called Thomas Smith the Doctor of Interception, I would have also said that might be a little bit of an exaggeration. So, yeah just not a memorable player. I think the only thing you remember about him is that he was the first round pick.
Yeah, and he did start and he did play, and
Sure.
he wouldn't have if he did that. It was funny, way back a year ago, we were doing a program about Bills backers bars in Miami, and I found one, Brendan's
In West Palm Beach.
In West Palm Beach, Brendan's. Yeah, I should remember this. It was good. It was fun. He just talked about what it's like when the Bills play down there, and he said that one of his regulars is Thomas Smith. So it was great to hear that Thomas Smith is still
connected to the Bills.
Big Bills fan.
Yeah,
right?
For sure. That is interesting.
Yeah,
amazing how many late first round picks in the 90s were DBs.
It is. You mentioned that before the show.
It's unbelievable how many first round picks, how much draft capital the Bills as a franchise have given to DBs over the past 35 years. It's incredible.
It seems disproportionate for sure. It would be fun to explore that, about just why it is that they always felt that need. If it was this maybe is an oversimplification, but it's almost like the first round picks played at a level where they played well enough to start, but not well enough to earn a second contract.
Right.
So
and then you got
4 years later, you just got to replace that guy.
Yep. Yeah, that's what it felt like.
Yeah.
That's a good observation.
Yeah.
Next guy on the list, Jim Leonard.
Oh man, Jim Leonard was a undrafted free agent. You hear this sometimes, like, oh, I never would have thought that guy was a football player if you saw him walking down the street.
Did he look like a marketing guy?
Well, he was very strong. He looked like a gymnast.
Okay.
Kind of.
Interesting.
Like he, biceps but maybe 5'6".
5'6", 5'7", really?
I honestly think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe 5'8". I don't know, but not any taller. But he had a boyish face. You could look it up.
Sure.
And a boyish. So one of the things I did on the road was I stood in front of the roped line that went to the buses, and I would account for everyone to make sure we weren't leaving them behind. And it was really just when players were injured and getting treatment that the trainers would bring those guys out. But when Jim Leonard came through, there were a lot of, depending on where we were, there was some access if we were close enough to being outside the stadium, where if players wanted to, they could go over to this area and sign autographs. And, there were fans looking for autograph. And like, no one ever asked Jim Leonard for his autograph. They thought he was part of the staff or something, probably.
That's hilarious.
But then he went to Baltimore and the Jets.
Yes.
And in both places, he was a starter and a big contributor.
Would you have said he'd be a coach?
Yeah, sure. I would say, especially when you're, a safety and calling the shots back there. Obviously, his intelligence was something that kept him in the league.
Sure. Okay. Next guy on the list. I don't know how much interaction you had with him personally. We do know the story about how Jim Kelly helped run him out of town. Derek Burrows.
Oh, yeah. Derek Burrows. When I was an intern, and I was there for a few months in '88, it was very exciting. It was just lucky timing for me. I only worked the season, and I was in the ticket office. I thought that was going to be it for me, that only year. And I was told, though, that if we made the Super Bowl, which was going to be in Miami, that they were going to take me to work it. I was really excited.
Of course.
It would have meant a week off from college. I already talked to
and you'd be going to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I told the college professor who
Sure.
put me in that position, hey, is it okay? He was like, is it okay?
Yeah.
What are you? Oh, this is a dream situation. I hope it happens for you. So it was the AFC Championship game at Cincinnati. Bruce Smith owned Anthony Munoz. It was all in the backfield all day long.
I remember.
And the game came down to a final possession, and I think it was third down, maybe fourth down, at least third down. And Boomer Esiason threw the ball. I'm not blaming the refs for this one because I think it was the right call.
I remember
it was like a hold or pass interference, and it gave them a fresh set of downs. They scored. They ended up winning.
Yeah.
It didn't look like a bad call, but it was so costly.
And then he kind of left.
Well, he had a terrible neck injury.
Okay.
The next year, it was a very, very scary injury that like crushed vertebrae. I don't think I think he maybe tried to get healthy enough to come back, but never could come back from that. It was too bad.
It's a bummer about that game. That was a game that was winnable. And then obviously the next week was one of the best, or 2 weeks was one of the best Super Bowls at the time.
Yeah.
Cincinnati was right there till, the last, it was the Joe Montana to John Taylor in the back of the end zone, a 2-minute drive. So the Bills were right there. They were right there that year in '88. They had a great defense.
Yeah. It makes me think that maybe the Bills-Bengals rivalry is a little underrated.
Agreed.
Given current back.
Agreed. Totally agree. Next guy on the list we just talked to on our show with Marlin, Notre Dame corner, first-round pick Jeff Burris. He came on our show this spring. He's doing really well at Louisiana. They beat Buffalo in a game, and then he's the DB coach there. Another guy with a solid Bills career, first-round pick again, kind of like a replacement of the Thomas Smith. He kind of replaced Thomas when it looked like Thomas wasn't going to get a second contract.
Yeah.
So kind of that cycle of first-round guys late in the round because the Bills were good.
Yeah.
So just always picked,
His second contract ended up being either Indy or Cincinnati.
Yeah.
He ended up with Cincinnati. It was great having him on the show. It was funny because when you and I had him,
he was bald.
I have a different vantage point here, so I see it after the show, like really see them. And then when he was on your show, you asked him, I think you or Marlon, you asked him, is it more stressful to be a coach? And he's like, take a look at my hair.
Yeah.
It was like white.
Full on white.
Yeah, what a nice, oh man, what a great guy he is.
He sure is. He's the best.
Pleasant, yeah.
All right. Not the best.
Oh, and his signature play,
pick 6
against Jacksonville that should have put us up 7. Feels like it should have iced the game, but it didn't. Jacksonville somehow came back and won. Ended Jim Kelly's career. That's another tough one to swallow.
Not the best here. One of my more infuriating Bills. Another first-round pick, J.D. Williams.
Yeah.
What? Okay.
Right.
Wasn't there a story about how he couldn't see?
Oh,
remember he had fitted for glasses, or there was some sort of nearsightedness or whatever that they found out, and that was going to be the thing that got him kind of over the hump. Boy, what a maddening player he was! Another guy with all the talent, and just.
I think you're funny. You bring that vision thing up. I do remember that because they're like, what is up? He seems to be misreading, misgauging.
Yes,
distances, depth perception, something. Again, he started for a while and he was kind of the nickel. I do remember a big play that he had, but he was more the beneficiary of it. I think it was Steve Tasker block punt, amazing
against
block.
The Raiders.
Yeah, and it took a gratuitous bounce right up to JD.
You and I could have run that one in.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. It was he was the beneficiary of Tasker's unbelievable effort. But hard to think of too many other plays.
Just another frustrating use of draft capital. Man, the 90s Bills, think about that offense.
Yeah.
And how little there were no first-round picks. John Fina, but that was about it. It was consistently they were trying to fill holes on defense. And boy, if you would have maybe doubled and tripled down on the offense.
That would be today's theory. There's one coming up, I'm sure, that finally proved to be worthy of a first round pick, but I'm sure he's on the list. I haven't seen it.
Okay.
But JD Williams, I think too, if you look at the Super Bowls, not so much the Giants game, but the Redskins shredded us through the air, and the Cowboys did, too, with Aikman and Irvin, and you could see while at least those Super Bowls as a microcosm sort of showed the need to just get better there, but then the string of guys just
and the other, I guess,
the answers, right?
Just thinking about it now, the other thing is free agency wasn't as prominent.
True.
So you couldn't fill a hole bringing in a free agent.
Yeah.
So really, you had to kind of just through the draft, and boy, you just kept throwing first round picks at this problem.
Yeah.
On the opposite side of Nate Odoms.
Yeah.
You just kept throwing. And then Nate Odoms leaves. We'll talk about him obviously, but he leaves, and then you got 2 holes in there, and you're just always throwing draft capital at this position, and it just never seemed to work out.
Kept coming up short in terms of long term.
Right.
Yeah.
Next guy on the list is a drought era guy that I'm sure that you have a memory or two about, Aaron Williams.
Yeah. Aaron Williams was a solid safety. Came out of Texas. He was
seems like a nice guy,
real
likable
nice guy. Yeah, went around the building, got to know people. He was just smiling. He was very charitable. For some reason, he struck up a really strong friendship with Fred Jackson, who was older than him. It was almost like Aaron Williams was his little brother. And at Halloween parties, they dressed up like Fred Flintstone and Barney.
Oh, how funny.
And
didn't he have a real bad injury?
He did. It was a neck injury similar to Derek Burrows, but he actually came back from it, I believe, and had a couple big plays, like a fumble recovery, a couple solid years that I don't think he made the Pro Bowl, but he was maybe in the conversation. But his career ended up being just too short. But that's I haven't thought about him in a while.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Next guy on the list. This is a drought era special because I have no memory of him.
All right,
I have to say, Brian Scott.
Yeah, Brian Scott. This is funny. We had a rash of injuries. Here's my recollection of that. The 2007 opener against Denver, we lost like 4 players for the season with ACLs, and they were linebackers and DBs, and they were good players. Kevin Everett was same game he got injured. A lot of people forget that we also lost like 3 guys for the season, ACLs. It's similar to a game you talk about during your career in 2000 with Sam Cowart and those when you lost. Yeah, this was very similar. It's just like, are you kidding me? And we had to scramble to bring in these players that had some NFL experience, but they were going to get called into action right away. And I was doing the electronic contracts and having to send them to the league. And you have to populate it. The easy part is, first name, last name, position, and then you get into the salary, and that's where it gets tricky. But we signed a guy named Copeland Bryan.
Okay.
Bryan was his last name.
Okay.
We signed a guy named Leon Joe.
Okay, yeah, I remember that.
Joe was his last name.
I remember that, yeah. And then Brian Scott.
And 3 guys. It was all like in the same day or the same week. And I thought someone was messing with me because I didn't know who they were.
Right.
And all 3 of their last names were first names.
And you have to be exact.
Oh,
on these things.
Exactly. And I remember going back and like, is this right?
Leon Joe.
And then they all ended up contributing, but Brian Scott was the biggest contributor. He ended up being a solid starter.
Is that a chaotic Monday for you after a game like that with a bunch of injuries?
It was horrible.
Do you know it Sunday night? Are you like,
yeah, there's going to be tryouts. There's going to be guys coming in that scouting guys are going to doing, and we're going to sign some of them.
Okay.
We have to fill, the 53, and they're going to have to play next week.
So you probably don't sleep all that well that Sunday night, just knowing that, not that the pressure's on you, but you got to get this stuff done Monday morning, and it's going to be a lot.
It was terrible because, Kevin Everett alone,
right,
to deal with a situation like that where we didn't know if he was going to survive.
Sure.
We lost the game on somehow it was tied, and somehow with you'll appreciate this, maybe less than 10 seconds left. Denver had no timeouts. They rush their field goal unit.
I remember that.
And it was a 45, 50. And with 1 second, the ball is snapped. They kick it. It was good. We lose. So on top of Kevin Everett, on top of the other 3 injuries, and then losing a game like that, that was one of those Sunday nights that you just dread knowing.
Yeah. How many hours
the next day?
How many hours you sleep?
No, hardly at all.
Hardly any. Just tossing and turning and oh God, I got to deal with all this crap on Monday morning.
Yeah.
Those are the bad ones. That's when working for the NFL is not fun.
No,
it's just not fun.
That was not. Yeah, I was thinking about that. But Brian Scott was back to him. Real nice guy. He played guitar too.
Okay, interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
All right, next guy on the list is a guy that was there when I was there. Really solid player. Somebody who another one of those guys who you couldn't really point to a signature play, but he was a good pro. Kenny Irvin.
Yeah.
Nice guy. I remember about Kenny Irvin. Anytime he ever made any play, whether it was practice, training camp, mini camp, he'd always point to the sky. I don't know if it was to God or to a relative who had passed or whatever, but every play was to the sky, which just got jogged in my memory. He had like 0% body fat. I mean, just seeing him in the locker room, like 0. Yeah. I remember walking by him one day and I'm like, yeah, I will never be like that. Like this dude was just, and he wasn't like ripped. He was just, he was just as lean. He was tall and lean. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, that guy, he looked like an NFL player. He looked like a DB because he just was tall and lean and had no body fat.
And he was the opposite corner of Marlin, right?
He was, yeah. So it was him, and it was Antoine. He was opposite Antoine Winfield, and then Marlin was like the nickel or the fourth corner. And they had a bunch of guys then who played well. Like the secondary in 98, 99, and 2000 was really good. Yeah. So he was just a really solid pro. One of the guys who was really well respected, but he was really quiet, didn't say much. And he looked like a DB.
Yeah, he got me in trouble. It wasn't his fault at all. It was just a situation when we were working for Christy Wilson, and she was in Florida, and she would call me every day. And this is just pre-internet, so she wasn't getting Bills news in Florida. So I was her source, and she would always ask me, what's going on? She appreciated hearing what was happening with the team. And I said one morning, I said, we're Kenny Irvin signing. He had agreed to terms.
Okay.
And I was marginally involved with it as a kid. We re-signed Kenny Irvin. This is in the off season. And, okay. So later that afternoon, she calls me back and she goes, my dad is furious with me. And I'm like, okay, what? Mr. Wilson is, she goes, I told him that it was good news that we re-signed Kenny Irvin. And he was like, we have not re-signed Kenny Irvin. All it was he hadn't signed the contract yet. And he did sign it like the next day. And so from that point forward, I learned with Christy that anytime she would ask me something, I would say, well, WGR is reporting that, or Channel 7's reporting that. I was very careful.
Can I make a really, really snarky joke right now?
This is your show, man.
I wish you would have learned that lesson maybe a little bit better. All right, we're going to keep moving.
That's an inside thing, unless you I don't know how much we ever talked about that aspect of your dismissal.
We have not. So we're going to maybe just leave it there.
Okay.
But sorry. I had to do it.
That was fair.
Drayton Florence. Let's move on.
Yeah.
Drayton Florence, the second place or third place winner of our most important or biggest interception in regular season Bills history.
Yeah.
What was it like in the stadium when he picked that ball off?
It was one of the loudest. You talk about Lawyer Malloy being announced. It was one of the loudest, maybe in the drought era. It might have been the loudest. It was the game-winning it put us ahead of New England in whatever year that was, 11.
Yeah.
And Marcel Darius, I think it hit Darius in the helmet. And then, but Drayton took it in.
Where are you during that play?
I was in the press box with Jim Overdorf,
but not the press box, not the large, like one of the Bills,
a private booth.
What's your reaction? What are you allowed to do on a play like that, or what do you do?
Because it was a September game, and the weather was just super beautiful. We had the window open.
Yep.
So because the window was open,
it's a little more freedom.
We could express good for better or worse.
Okay.
You could cheer and get away with it.
Okay.
Because behind us was glass doors that you couldn't they couldn't hear us, but still we try to respect.
You bang the table, like, are you? You're fired up.
Yeah, you're like, you feel like you can be kind of a fan.
If the window was closed,
you had to dial it back.
Okay, and you're sitting there with your boss.
Yeah, the bosses. Yeah, right. Yeah, but one particular. Yeah, Jim had no filter at all. But Drayton Florence, that was a huge play. He made cover Sports Illustrated, and we've been trying to get him on here. He does a lot of military work now.
Okay, cool.
In Jacksonville, Florida, he's got a foundation. And during the lockout, we were not allowed to talk to players, and they they would call me if they were due an incentive bonus check.
Okay.
So, but we weren't allowed to talk to them.
You were probably popular, huh?
So yeah, and we weren't allowed to take their calls.
Okay.
But they made a few exceptions, and that was one of them, that we could take that call. And then we had regular meetings in the conference room, and we had to log any interaction that we had with players, whether it was inadvertent or on purpose, what the nature of the conversation was. And then Tony Adio had to send those logs to the league office.
Wow. Okay.
That's how serious they were about no contact.
Sure.
And he reached out to me like 3 or 4 times. And so every time we had a meeting, I'm like, yeah, Drayton called me again. Here's what it was. It was like,
as long as you report it, you're fine.
Yeah, we were fine. Yeah, okay. We didn't apparently overstep.
Interesting. We're going to leave it there for part 1 of this. This has been really fun. You and I are going to laugh off camera about the joke I just made. And then we're going to be back our next episode for part 2 of this, where we go through the last 12 or 13 guys on this list. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
The Dirty Dozen.
The Dirty Dozen.
All right.
I'm going to leave it recorded.